All right. Welcome back into the Between the Hashmarks podcast. I'm Matt Lombardo, as always, joined by my friend, colleague, mentor, and the purveyor of the Two Deep Zone, Mike Tanier. Mike, what's going on, my friend?
Not much. It was a scary moment before we came on. I could not find my podcasting hat.
That would have been a tragedy. That would have been a great disappointment, especially those watching on YouTube and on Substack, where the podcast originates from. The podcast hat makes the show, and I'm sure that the football takes would have been knocked down a few notches without the thinking hat on there for the podcast.
Yeah, I'm like Captain America without his shield when I'm not wearing this thing. And the bald spot could blind people. So, but crisis averted. It's on. We are ready to roll.
Absolutely. And of course, the preseason, thankfully, is behind us. There's this de facto bye week as teams trim their rosters to 53, and they get just about 2 weeks in the case of the Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs and the Philadelphia Eagles and the Green Bay Packers, who play on Thursday night and Friday night in Brazil, respectively, for week one. Some bonus football, Friday Night Lights edition for the NFL, a little bit less than the full 2-week bye week leading into the season, but the preseason is over. The hurdles have been cleared, and the next time the toe meets the football, the results count for real, and I couldn't be more excited.
Absolutely. And in fact, if you watched Florida State, Georgia Tech from Dublin on Saturday, it's like they kicked off, and I turned to my wife, and it's like it's really football season now.
Yes.
Meaningful, actual football, college counts has happened, and you feel that little rush of energy. Saying, I'm not talking about camp. I'm not talking about practice. Like Allen Iverson talking about practice. Like now we'll be talking about the real thing.
And Georgia Tech delivered the upset with the field goal as time expired, sending the Noles back to Tallahassee on a 18-hour transatlantic flight with a loss in tow, 0-1. The insanity of college football is back, and I am so here for it. And this also, Mike, marks the time of year, the last 3 or 4 years, where I've reached out to my contacts and my sources around the NFL, current players, current coaches, scouts, executives, this year expanding the panelists to a couple of agents who have their fingertips in buildings all across the NFL on their thoughts on the surprise MVP candidate who's flying under the radar, the surprise team that's going to come out of nowhere, and their Super Bowl pick. And, there were some surprises. These guys delivered the goods in this survey that you can find at Between the Hashmarks on Substack.
I saw that, and there are some real surprises, also some unsurprising surprises in there. And I guess where do you want to start? I think maybe we should start with the team choices, because right now our minds are on teams that are going to overproduce, underdeliver, et cetera.
For sure. And I think that what really surprised me is, one, the Denver Broncos taking the lead as the surprise team coming out of nowhere. They received 3 of the about dozen votes from the panelists surveyed. And obviously, Bo Nix getting the start. I think that there's some optimism with what they've built there. There was a quote from a AFC personnel executive not employed by the Denver Broncos, said, "I like the Broncos. It's a better roster than people think, and the coach is going to make Bo Nix successful." That resonated with me a little bit, but I also think, as you and I have discussed ad nauseum on the pod, that there are going to be growing pains, and there are certainly going to be growing pains for a system quarterback like Bo Nix.
Absolutely growing pains for Bo Nix. They have a lot of veterans scattered around the roster, a lot of good players scattered around the roster. Might be a little sanguine to think this is all going to be rosy. But when you talk about surprise teams and expectations, I just checked. The Broncos over-under is way down at 5.5 wins. Now,
right.
If you say, well, this team can go 7-10, this team can go 8-9, that's overachieving. If you say this team could be in the wild card picture, I don't think that's outlandish. In fact, let me do this right now. Their over-unders at 6.5. If you're a believer in this team and you want to take the Broncos, the original was 5.5. If you want to tease it up to 6.5, you can get plus 150 odds.
Yes.
Plus 150 odds. And I don't see that as like off the wall crazy. There's meat on that bone. And it does reflect the fact that Sean Payton is an established coach. This is the system he wants now. It's not the Russell Wilson hybrid thing he was doing last year. And Nix does look like somebody who can be competent as a rookie.
Absolutely. And you mentioned very briefly there, Russell Wilson, who's now in Pittsburgh. That's another team that garnered a vote from an executive inside the league who told me flat out, the Steelers are my sleeper team, bar none. Changing quarterbacks was critical for them. And I always believe in and bet on established coaches. And Mike Tomlin has made the postseason, or at least finished 500 every single year. Now, doesn't know what it's like to have a losing season there in Pittsburgh. And it's a little bit of quarterback roulette, even at this point, between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. And we're going to dive into that debate as the show goes on here. But the thought of the Steelers being a surprise team in a division that includes the Baltimore Ravens and the Cincinnati Bengals, two legitimate Super Bowl threats.
Yeah.
It just seems like that might be a Herculean leap from where we last saw the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Agreed. And you have a Browns team that has one of the 2 or 3 best defenses in football. I know that Deshaun Watson now has arm soreness.
Yeah,
because the rolling aches and pains on his body has reached the arm again. So we'll see how that goes. But this is a team that won with a bunch of quarterbacks, Joe Flacco and others, and reached the playoffs last year. I agree. Changing quarterbacks was critical. And it's kind of like anyone's better than Kenny Pickett. I don't want to slam Pickett too hard, but I think we're seeing that's increasingly clear. I just don't know when you talk about sleepers and exceeding expectations. Again, I'm pulling up the DraftKings right now. They're at 8.5 wins. The Steelers over-under is 8.5 wins.
you're going to have to win 10 or 11 games for me to really feel like you surprised some people.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I'm like, yeah, is this maybe a 9-8 team because of what Tomlin can do? Yeah, that's every year. We kind of say the same thing about them.
For sure. And the other teams receiving 1 vote. We'll get to the kind of surprise in the category in a second here, because I think we talked off air a little bit about this and our feelings are very similar. But the other teams receiving votes, the Mike Tanier fighting Los Angeles Chargers, the Indianapolis Colts, the New York Jets, the Tennessee Titans, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Atlanta Falcons. And according to one AFC linebacker who I spoke to, he said that the Atlanta Falcons geared up at some key positions. They're going to surprise some people, and I'm excited to see what they can do.
I believe that. Again, the Falcons are kind of a non-sleeper sleeper because everyone can look at their division and look at Justin Simmons and Matt Judon joining Kirk Cousins and add like a win or 2 or 3 to last year's total and get them to the playoffs. The Chargers are the Chargers are the Chargers. Yes. Stuck in an elevator.
The plantar fasciitis is going to play an issue for Justin Herbert. I really think, as somebody who's seen family members with plantar fasciitis, who has covered the league long enough to see how plantar fasciitis impacts running backs, this is going to be a backdrop for the Chargers and for Justin Herbert. But hey, at least he can help rescue his teammates from a stuck elevator.
That's it. His teammates, Dan Fouts' wife, he is a hero. He didn't do anything. He just kind of stood there, but he's still a hero. I thought plantar fasciitis was their new wide receiver. That's what you were referring to. It's a young kid for a European League guy that came over. There are a lot of issues there. The thing is, it wouldn't be the offseason if there wasn't somebody trumping the Chargers as a sleeper team.
No doubt. And the one surprise team that I don't know that they necessarily belong in the conversation of the category is the Houston Texans. Yeah. And they tied the Denver Broncos with 3 votes, including from one NFC running back who told me the Texans are, quote, going to be a very complete team this year. Well, yes. And he has Houston and the Detroit Lions as his 2 teams in the Super Bowl. Now, if you want to tell me Houston as a Super Bowl team, maybe that's a mild surprise when you think about having to overtake the Kansas City Chiefs and the Baltimore Ravens. But I look at what they've built around CJ Stroud, who already after 1 year, I count him as a top 10 quarterback in the league. And he dropped Stephon Diggs with Nico Collins and Tank Dell. Joe Mixon comes over as the thunderbolt in the backfield, and a dynamic defense with a hyper-competitive head coach. That's a team to me that's in the Super Bowl conversation, not necessarily a sleeper surprise team to watch, but nevertheless, in the survey of a dozen panelists, various categories around the league, they tie the Denver Broncos with 3 votes apiece.
And that, you know what, I sometimes joke a little bit about the insiders because, we've been in a situation where you're at the Super Bowl or the Combine and you're talking to somebody really important, and they'll be like, after a couple of drinks, hey, you want to know a secret? The Chiefs are really good. Like that's sort of like they think this is insider knowledge that the rest of us don't know. It's like, yeah, we're on board with that. But on this one, I'll say this right now, the over-under for the Texans is way down at 9.5. So you and I might be saying, yeah, Super Bowl conversation. The house is saying they're still one of these sort of wild card mixed teams along the way. And there's, for a wagerer, there's value there. And your source said it was the Lions against the
Texans. Yes.
Texans for the Super Bowl. I had to pick because I'm going to be on radio. I'm going to be on other podcasts. Like, what are
Ooh,
your
spoiler.
Super Bowl teams, right? You always get asked, what are your Super Bowl picks? And my Super Bowl picks are almost always 49ers against the Chiefs again, because, what happened last year will happen again this year. I realized I wanted to come up with a cool one. Aaron Schatz
Okay.
always came up with a cool one. My cool one is Lions versus Texans.
There you go.
And so I'm right on board with one of your
With the
sources there.
running back. With the running back in the NFC.
With an NFC running back. I'm on board with mystery running back.
Yes.
I'm not
So
going
there
to
you go. When you talk about this, I think there's an element of people like you and I, we might be too close to the situation from the
Right.
entire league because we spend minimum 8, 9, 10 waking hours thinking about this stuff, thinking of new ways to analyze this stuff, write about this stuff, and talk about it. So to us, hearing the Houston Texans as a surprise team, well, we've been, obsessing over the Texans and what they're building for months since the
marinating in
Diggs trade.
Marinating in it. Whereas somebody coming in August, like, what's happening in the NFL? Hey, the Texans might be good. What, the Texans? Isn't that the
Right.
team that was getting run by the street corner preacher a couple of years ago? What are you talking about? So yeah, it is good to like balance like
Yes.
how close to the information you've gotten.
And a player who's getting ready for the regular season and training camp, thinking
Yeah.
about his playbook, his system,
Yes.
how he wins a job, or an executive thinking about, well, what pieces does my team need? They might view it a little bit differently. Now they probably have more institutional knowledge of this stuff, and maybe the house in Vegas and these executives are right that a team like Houston is still on the come up rather than arrived in a conference that has Kansas City, Baltimore, Cincinnati, the Jets, who are another sleeper team that got some votes, the Buffalo Bills that have been to the doorstep for this entire era. It feels like maybe Houston hasn't quite arrived in that conversation and we're just overvaluing them. But that's one of the things that's most exciting about how a regular season is going to play out because you just don't know.
Right. And those guys aren't always looking at the actual schedule and stuff like that because, they're serious. They're talking about, look how they handled the salary cap, or look how that that defensive lineman hits the 2 gap or whatever. And they're seeing really, really in-depth stuff, but then you can miss some of these other things that we say. Same thing happens, I think, in the MVP debate.
Right. For sure.
And
That's a perfect that's a segue in the business. See, that's where the podcast hat comes in.
It's a segue.
Podcast hat delivers the segue. The MVP conversation. I try to couch this question every year because anybody can give me their MVP pick. Everybody can say Patrick Mahomes. Everybody can say Joe Burrow, right? I mean, it's one thing to ask who's your pick. It's another, give me the guy who's undervalued. Give me your MVP sleeper.
Yes.
And boy, did an NFC South personnel director deliver the goods. So much of Jared Goff's turnaround is rooted in finally playing for coaches who believe in him and having pieces around him, unquote. Jared Goff receiving MVP votes. This one was split right down the middle, and I'm just going to read you the names. Everybody received one vote. No consensus here.
Okay.
Aaron Rodgers, Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins, CJ Stroud, Mike Tanier's fantasy starting quarterback, Justin Herbert, Kyler Murray, Saquon Barkley, Tyreek Hill, Mike Evans, and Josh Allen receiving votes. From one AFC offensive coach not in Miami, quote, I'm firmly in the camp that Tyreek Hill should get consideration, especially if he puts up the kind of numbers he did last season, because without him, the Dolphins offense isn't nearly the same, and Tua is a way less effective quarterback, unquote, the case for Tyreek Hill.
No lies told. And, I operate in this analytics sphere where they say, well, it has to be a quarterback. It has to be a quarterback because they're the most valuable. And then Tua or Brock Purdy will blow the league away. And they'll say, well, they can't be it because of their supporting cast. And then I will say, well, why then don't we give it to Tyreek Hill or Christian McCaffrey? Because quarterbacks are important. And like, do you see that you're in a logic loop right now? Do you see that you are chasing your tail around in circles in this conversation? That at some point you have to say, well, if all of the quarterback's value is not in the quarterback, then there should be an open road for other players, other positions. My one question about Tyreek Hill is his age. He's 30 years old now. Are we really going to anticipate that he's going to have another one of those, let's call him offensive player of the year caliber seasons at this stage in his career? And that's a little bit of a higher risk.
The case for would be it's another year of chemistry with Tua. It's another
Yeah.
year of Tua's development in Mike McDaniel's system. That's the case for. You've outlined the case against, especially given some of the injury concerns. But you look at this, I think it is telling that there was no real runaway winner because I think that this is the Patrick Mahomes MVP award until it's not. And obviously, Lamar Jackson had a great year a year ago. He's in that conversation. Joe Burrow's in that conversation.
Yeah.
But once you break out of those 3 or 4 players, it kind of is an open field. And it comes down to, in a lot of ways, are any of these quote unquote surprise teams going to break through? You know, getting back to the conversation in terms of sleeper teams, I had somebody say, look out for the Jets. They have the top cornerback duo in the league, linebackers that can run. The offense is powered by a good running game and 2 excellent wide receivers. Also, by the way, 2 words, Aaron Rodgers. That's from an
Yeah.
NFL coordinator. So it makes sense then that Rodgers receives an MVP vote if that is the consensus of how some people feel about the Jets.
Right. And I would consider him under the radar at this point because you're talking about a 41-year-old coming off an injury who's sometimes just othered into this category of like strange political football guy, not like, oh no, he's one of the best players in the NFL.
Yes.
You know, and we'll talk
Coming
about
off an Achilles, coming
yeah,
off an
coming off an
Achilles too, which
Achilles.
a Jets executive, you actually outlined almost word for word the cynicism that a Jets executive had
Okay.
about the Aaron Rodgers case, because I told him, you guys are getting a lot of love. And he goes, yes, it's all tied to a 40-plus-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles, LOL emoji.
Right, right. So, but that's what makes him under the radar. Like, this is an amazing story if he comes through. And, you know, they can go very far deep into the playoffs, reaches the Super Bowl without him playing at an MVP level. You know, Aaron Schatz and I will talk about on the on our FTN podcast. Can you tell the story of how this team wins the Super Bowl and how outlandish is the story? The Jets story is not outlandish.
Right.
Rodgers comes back, plays about as well as he played 2 or 3 years ago, and the defense slaughters everybody. They reach the Super Bowl. That's not outlandish. You know, the Texans one's not outlandish. It's when you get to like, you know, the Steelers or something like that, where it becomes a little bit more of a,
Oh, I got one of those for you.
I can't
I
wait.
got one of those scenarios for you
Oh
in the
God.
respondents.
You've got like a serial killer look on your eyes saying, and I'm a little worried. I just want to go back to one of those choices. I love it. Mike Evans. I can't see
Yes.
Mike Evans winning MVP, but man, talk about a lifetime achievement award kind of guy.
Hall of Fame.
Yeah, if he comes out there and that team makes the playoffs and he has his 33rd straight 1,000-yard season. I mean, we can talk about the Hall of Fame, but it feels like instead of like the comeback player of the year, there should be like never needed a comeback player of the year
Mr.
award.
Consistency Award, the Mike Evans Mr. Consistency Award you give out every year.
Yes, the Mr. Consistency Award, the reverse comeback award for Mike Evans. Something like that to demonstrate what he's done over a decade now, I think.
Yes. So we'll get to the boring Super Bowl picks in a second here. But I had a coach actually with a straight face predict Los Angeles Rams against New York Jets.
Oh my God. Did they give any elaboration that you can share on that?
Did not follow up other than he believes in the offense and that they found a rhythm once they got Kyren Williams going. Now, I posed this article on Threads at Matt Lombardo NFL.
Okay.
And I just asked people, what's your biggest surprise? And just going in here, Richard Woolhams checks in. I would like a taste of whatever the guy who predicted a Rams Jets Super Bowl was drinking, but only a taste. I wouldn't want to be that loony permanently. I think his pick assumes some sort of catastrophic event that rendered 30 teams unable to take the field. Now, that's a tad extreme. But I do think that Rams Jets, this is going to make us both look incredibly stupid when we play this back in March.
Right.
And Rams won the Super Bowl over the Jets. But I do think the pick is kind of outlandish. But I can individually kind of build the case that if Brock Purdy suffers a season-ending injury, God forbid, or if Christian McCaffrey misses significant time, or Trent Williams decides, you know, screw this, if they're not going to pay me, they can't play me. If Deebo Samuel goes off the defense, and Brandon Ayuk is in Pittsburgh, or whatever the case may be,
Right.
and the Rams sneak in,
Yeah.
I could see the Jets and Aaron Rodgers and that defense getting hot, and who knows what happens. That's the case for. The case against, so many things have to happen for the scenario to play out. So many.
Right. And it starts with, well, you have to eliminate the 49ers like with fire.
Yes.
You have to use like a torpedo or a meteor on the 49ers. So when you pick the Lions, you can be like, well, it's the NFC Championship team, and they bat heads, and Shanahan makes a dumb mistake in the fourth quarter, and you're in. You can say that with the Cowboys. You say that with the Eagles. You could do a Falcons thing saying, well, they blow up their division, they get home field advantage, and like everybody goes through there. Once you get to that Rams tier, you have to say, well, we have to nuke the 49ers from space, and now you have a chance. That's not a chance. That's not that's not
It's
a
not
good
reality.
chance. Not reality, not something to base like a wager upon, something to base a strong opinion on. And so again, thank you, Richard. That was amazing. But like I'm in that camp. I'd like to, on a weekend when I don't have to drive, take a hit or two off of whatever that guy was ingesting.
And this will ring pretty familiar as we go over some of these responses here from an NFC front office member. Quote, "I'm not betting against Patrick Mahomes," and that's fine. And I'm kind of in that camp myself, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this in coming weeks. I believe this is the best supporting cast they've ever built around Patrick Mahomes, which could make it really dangerous. When you look at his talent, especially if the receiving core bounces back, if Rashee Rice is available, if Xavier Worthy delivers on the promise of all of the speed, you still have Travis Kelce, you have some pretty good running backs there.
He just brought Juju Smith-Schuster back. Now, I don't know what he's got left. I think sometimes his bounce around the league is that he's not the most focused tool in the toolbox.
Right.
But they've worked with him. They kind of know what they're expecting there. He could be a contributor this year.
Yep. So receiving 2 votes apiece, Detroit Lions over Kansas City Chiefs. When we make our picks next week on the pod, that's going to be, you might hear something similar to that.
Yeah.
The Kansas City Chiefs over the Detroit Lions also receiving 2 votes. So that's a very
That's the same thing, but
popular.
just that's 4 votes
Yes.
for that combination.
For that combination. Baltimore Ravens over San Francisco 49ers. The
Okay.
Lions over the Texans, which we touched on earlier. Chiefs over Philadelphia Eagles, which I know would make you reasonably happy. Kansas City Chiefs over the San Francisco 49ers. So a rematch of last year with the same result. Philadelphia Eagles over Houston Texans got a vote. And then the dark horse of sleeper picks, Rams over Jets.
Oh my gosh. I'm trying to look up right now the exact combination. Because a lot of people had Lions versus Chiefs, right?
Yes.
4 votes for Lions versus Chiefs. If you think that's the Super Bowl and you don't have to pick the winner, plus 2,500 odds.
I might jump on that when we get off the air here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily believe in it, but it's not outlandish by any means. And if you have all these, voices from inside the league seeing that going, put $5 on it. If you like it, put $5 on it, plus 2,500. You'll do all right for yourself.
Yeah, I'll take that. So what were sort of your takeaways, surprises from what we just went over? Did anything jump off the page of what these people are seeing and expecting going into the regular season?
It does sound like there's a lot of 49ers skepticism, doesn't there?
It does.
How much Cowboys? Did I miss the Cowboys in there?
Not named, not mentioned. No Dak Prescott, no CeeDee Lamb, no Micah Parsons. I went back last year and looked at RIP Fan Buzz. I looked at last year's results of this same survey, and Micah Parsons was mentioned as a potential sleeper MVP, not mentioned this year. Dallas Cowboys. I almost wonder, Mike, if there's a belief inside the league, not only off of one of the more bizarre off seasons where you had a veteran talent drain along the offensive line and some key defensive players go elsewhere, isn't tempering the expectations with the Dallas Cowboys, combined with a not going to fool me again type of attitude for a franchise that can't seem to find its way out of the wild card round, maybe the division round if they get a bye. But it just seems like the Cowboys are yesterday's news, and kind of justified when you think of everything the Eagles did this offseason, which to me puts them legitimately in the Super Bowl conversation. When you look at the Lions, when you look at the Packers, when you take a little, half-eyed glance at the Bears, when you look at the Rams, Seattle building something, the Cowboys are kind of an afterthought, and I think that might be where they belong going into this year.
It tells me that the thoughts inside the league mirror the thoughts outside the league to a degree. Because I keep tempering myself with the Cowboys, and it's like, Yeah, a lot of what we're talking about is contractual stuff and 2025 and beyond stuff. And they're going to line up with Dak and probably CD and Micah and some of these other guys. Deron Bland got hurt. That's like a little ding on them right now. But when
Suboptimal.
folks inside the league are kind of mirroring this and saying, yeah, these guys didn't do what they needed to improve. They're not optimizing the situation right now where these guys are going to come in gung ho, ready to give it 110%. Jarrah seems to be signaling that he's not that he's going to be Jarrah. He's going to be a little bit of a distraction and a little bit of a hurdle this year. If the league is thinking that and we're thinking that, there might be something to it.
For sure. And we're going to see a lot of the Jets this year. I think they lead the league in primetime games, which again, which,
Yeah.
just hopefully for the sake of entertaining football, if nothing else, Aaron Rodgers can stay healthy. But I think that it's the Rodgers staying healthy combined with an elite defense is powering the Jets into that conversation. But again, they're a team that's walking a bit of a tightrope because you have to deal with the Miami Dolphins, who I think are going to take a step forward. We talked about it with Richmond Webb on last week's episode. Go check it out if you missed it. You still have to deal with the Buffalo Bills in your division with Josh Allen. It's a new look receiving core, but Josh Allen is still Josh Allen.
Right.
And it's a loaded conference. It's going to be a tough road for the Jets, but I can see why they might be that surprise team if Rodgers' knees hold up.
Please hold up. Got to remember they have all three of those teams have the toughest schedules in the NFL, according to DVOA. They have to face each other, which is tough. I believe I don't have it in front of me. I believe they get the AFC North, so they get all of those teams. I forget who they get in the NFC, but they're all going to be facing a brutal schedule, and that's what you have to be careful of when you start making these prognostications. Because it's like, wow, what a phenomenal team. Why are they only 11-6? Because they played every other phenomenal team. And now they're on the road to the playoffs, and that causes a problem.
And the one situation where I think it could make a rebuild a little bit of a tough road to hoe, at least this offseason, this going into this regular season, is in New England. And, I watched the fourth quarter of that game last night in Washington. Who knows why? I remembered the game was on. So I saw my boy Trace McSorley throw a touchdown against the Patriots. But Jared Mayo, as of recording at almost 1 p.m. on Monday, the 26th, has not named a starting quarterback in New England, which I find fascinating. I guess if you think about the fact that you're facing such a brutal schedule, do you really want to throw Drake May out there against that gauntlet early?
Right.
Do you go with the veteran? What are you thinking? What are you hearing? What's your reaction to the quarterback carousel continuing to spin as so many other franchises have stopped and landed on their starter for week one?
Yeah, all the signals for the last 3 months coming out of there was saying they don't want to put pressure on Drake May early. They don't want to put pressure on this team early. And that means that they were going to go with Brissett. And it felt like that was the case up until this morning. Like as of last night, Jared Mayo was like, yeah, you know what? Drake May's played well. He's the second best quarterback on our roster right now. It's like, okay, you made your mind up in April and we're still there. Then this morning, he's like, well, let's be honest. Drake May outplayed Jacoby Brissett. I was like, okay.
That should be it then.
It could be it, but we have the whole breadth and depth of work. And you realize that like they do have practice reps and they can look at what percentage
Yes.
of the
Joint
playbook
practices, those sort of things too.
Yeah. What percentage of the playbook does Drake May really know, Alex Van Pelt? Tell me for real. He only knows 40%. We've been using those plays. So he does know all that. It's just a very odd signaling thing right now to be kind of saying, well, he's probably better, but we're going to bench him for the sake of benching him. I don't know how you go back from that and not start him now in week one.
For sure. And I just look at it as either the kid is ready, either Drake May is ready, and you're going to throw him into the lion's den and let him take his lumps, or it's what we saw for much of the preseason where there were moments and there were plays and there were throws and there were pressure concepts brought by the opposing defense where I don't know if you had the same reaction that I did, Mike, but it just seemed like he was light years away from being comfortable and ready.
Yeah.
And if that's the case in preseason against a hodgepodge of future insurance salesmen and veterans hanging on and start legitimate starters, what happens when you're out there against NFL starting defenses when you're swimming in the kiddie pool over here?
there have been some ejection balls, and he's kind of gotten away with some ejection balls.
Yes.
And let's start the season with the Bengals, who are, a Super Bowl contender. And then you get the Seahawks, who are a wild card team. Then you get the Jets and 49ers on the road. I'm feeling like maybe Jacoby Brissett goes out there and does the sparring partner routine for a while. And I'm guessing again, Mayo is thinking like that. I'm guessing Robert Kraft is somewhere out there if he's involved with this, thinking like that. So I wouldn't be surprised. Again, it's just weird messaging to not say something like, "Oh, we're proud of what Drake May has accomplished." But Jacoby Brissett remains the starter. You know how these coaches
For
talk.
sure.
Maybe
For
it's a credit
sure.
to Mayo.
And there's nothing wrong with taking the long-term view of
Yeah,
Drake May's development, because if you go into your rookie season with that murderer's row,
yeah.
with that receiving core,
Oh God.
I mean, you could be in a situation where you ruin a kid. But Jacoby Brissett is a competent veteran, been around the block, has shown that he can win football games. You put him out there for 5 or 6 weeks, you shake his hand and you say, you know what, we appreciate everything you've done.
Yeah.
Can you please take on the role of quarterback coach emeritus to Drake May the rest of the way? And you start there and you give the kid a little bit of a softer landing than going up against 3 Super Bowl contenders in the first 5 weeks.
Right, with two of the most vicious defenses that you're going to face. So, and that's again, messaging's weird. Maybe it's a credit to Mayo that he's not. I mean, some of Mike Tomlin's quotes right now are just banana pants nonsense, like word salad, when he just doesn't want to talk about his quarterback situation. At
It's been
least
like
Mayo,
that since the spring. It's been like that since the spring with Mike Tomlin. It's just
like that since
now
about
that there's a deadline, I'm like, let's turn the page and talk Steelers quarterbacks here for a little
yeah.
bit, because that to me was the most fascinating and intriguing quarterback battle across the league the entire offseason, summer, spring. Here we are. We've seen it all now. And you look at what they've been able to do with Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, and I look at the numbers aren't that dissimilar. They aren't that dissimilar
Okay.
what Fields and Wilson have done.
Right.
I'd argue Fields has been a little bit more proficient, perhaps.
He's been a little bit more something, perhaps.
But he's a lot more younger. And, I think it was Dan Orlovsky who made the case on ESPN last week. No, it was Mike Tannenbaum. It was former NFL GM Mike Tannenbaum who made the case that, you want, if you're the Steelers, for Justin Fields to win this job. You want, according to Mike Tannenbaum, Justin Fields to be the guy that you can sign to an extension and grow with, so you're not in quarterback purgatory for the next 3 to 4 years because you're not good enough to win, not bad enough to draft one. And then you figure out what to do with Russ later. Trade him, do what you want to do, get rid of him, get him out of there, or just have him be on the hook as a backup.
Right.
But I don't know about you. I think the best path forward for the Steelers is to go with Justin Fields. And I'm a guy who's been burned by Justin Fields in the past. I think I had him as a top 12 quarterback last year going into the regular season. Didn't quite work out that way. But with Arthur Smith and a run-based scheme, with George Pickens, with my guy Pat Freiermuth, like there are some weapons there that at this stage of Fields' career, it feels like the time, or it's never going to happen for him.
It is funny how our body language with Justin Fields gets kind of like
maybe.
maybe. And the thing is, like Tannenbaum is absolutely right. They wanted Justin Fields to come out and seize this job. A want is not a wish is not a plan. He hasn't. So this is a situation where there was a organization around him that would have given him this opportunity. He has not seized it. When you watch it in the preseason, you do see the scrambly highlights. We've seen a couple of throws. We've seen snaps that he can't handle. Now I know I think they have center issues there. I know they had some injuries at center. I don't like either of them at quarterback. I can't advocate for either of them, except that, well, these are decent stopgap solutions right now. And I just have a hard time saying, well, you put Fields out there, he'll make things happen with his feet, and that's going to parlay into something. I'm just as likely to say, Russell Wilson, go out there, game manage, maybe still do a little something on the run, and you're going to have the same long-term result. And the long-term result is 2025. It's time to get real and get a real solution at quarterback.
I can't remember, but it's been blurred burned into my brain stem. The Thursday night game in Denver, where I think they lost the game 6-3 or some ungodly score. And even Al Michaels was on the call talking about how it was one of the worst games that he's ever seen, about practically apologizing to the fans who tuned in. And you saw the fans streaming out of Mile High Stadium in Vesco Field
Yeah.
in
You're
overtime.
talking about Russ, right?
Yes, and
Okay.
and Russell Wilson missed KJ Hamler by like 5 feet above his head, and he was wide open in the end zone, and the game ended, and they lost.
Right.
I can't get that moment out of my brain when it comes to Russell Wilson. I can't overlook how badly things devolved with Sean Payton last year in Denver, and just think that you're going to wave a magic wand, snap your fingers 3 times, and all of a sudden it's going to be Seattle Seahawks Super Bowl era Russ Wilson again in Pittsburgh. And if that's not what you're getting, if you're running the risk of 6-3 overtime loss on prime time, just play Justin Fields. Try to develop with him.
I'm going to call that memory and raise it. And it's a game against the Vikings last year by the Bears with Justin Fields at quarterback after he came back from his injury. And I forget who was quarterbacking the Vikings. It might have been the Pastronaut, Joshua Dobbs. It might have been Jared Hall. It might have been you. But the Bears get the ball 3 or 4 times in the fourth quarter, needing a drive. And the Vikings put themselves in a position where they kind of do the old Randall Cunningham thing. We're not giving you any scrambling lanes. You got to get back here and pick us apart. And these are situations where you could drive for a field goal. And Justin Fields is taking sacks. He's holding the ball too long. He's trying to move around the pocket when they're not giving him any throwing lanes. And this is a third-year pro. Now, Russell Wilson's old. He went up the mountain, he came down. We're talking about third-year pro. And I'm like, is this guy going to develop where he's facing a fourth-string quarterback? And all he needs to do is do some sequential offense stuff, and they can't build something around him. I think we're stuck on the problem Mike Tomlin is stuck with. There's no good answer on this roster. There's just hopes and dreams and, a mega talent and a former superstar and trying to make a best of it. We might see a Taysom Hill situation with
what's funny you bring that up, because when the trade first went down, I asked some executives around the league what to make of it and what's your takeaway. And I had a scouting director tell me that the 2 quarterback set situations along the goal line and in short yardage are kind of limitless, because you can run Fields out there and take advantage of his mobility. You can put them in the shotgun with both of them out there, and who knows what you're going to do. And I could see that Taysom Hill type situation playing out. I have a hard time thinking that there's upside playing Russell Wilson based on the past 2 seasons. And all he had to do this preseason was go out there against future car salesmen and grocery baggers and up and coming rookies and beat the 4th-year pro and show that you can still play at a high level. And he just hasn't. And I guess I take the long-term team building view here, kind of like Mike Tannenbaum, that if you're not committed to Russ beyond this year, and there's a chance that Justin Fields can be the guy, go down swinging with Justin Fields. And if it works out, great, you can extend him in the middle of the year or after the year, and he's your guy. And if he's not, you're going to be pretty bad. You're going to stink. And then you can go and draft a guy next year.
I think we're both saying the same thing in different ways. It's like there's a 5% chance this works out. Yes. So throw all the chips in with Fields. Whereas there's kind of a 0% chance it works out big for Russ, but maybe you get to the playoffs and everything. Do the hedge and see if you can have another 9-8 season. And it's like, it's which side of the coin. Neither side of the coin is great. The coin is like a nickel, So it's kind of like choose your poison in that respect.
For sure. And, the franchise on the other side of the state, my side of the state in Eastern Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia Eagles, they made a big trade. There's Reggie White over your shoulder again. They made a big trade, in my opinion, to bring in Jahan Dotson last week. And I wrote about this in the column this morning. Whether Jahan Dotson winds up working out or not is almost besides the point. He's a 24-year-old wide receiver with 3 years of team control in front of him, including the 5th-year option, with a first-round pick pedigree, versatility to play in the slot or out wide. And, oh, by the way, Howie Roseman has spun a revolving door over the last couple of years with Almondea Zacharias and Julio Jones and Paris Campbell and Devontae Parker. Jahan Dotson stops that. And he also creates opportunities for you to get really creative if you're Kellen Moore when you have A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith, Jahan Dotson. Oh, Saquon Barkley's back there, and Dallas Goedert's over there, and Jalen Hurts is the best quarterback that Jahan Dotson has ever played with in his career.
Right.
I just feel like they plugged a. It might not be a big need on paper, but
Right.
could be a need with significant upside based on Dotson's pedigree and potential. That I think there are a lot of reasons going into that deal to be optimistic. Now it feels like you've built one of the deepest offenses in the league.
I think it is one of the deepest offenses in the league, and it's kind of like one of those Eagles fan binky needs. Because and we watch, but I watched with a lot of other Eagles fans. And when the ball was going to Quez Watkins, it was when the ball was going to Julio Jones, who was toast. It was like, and you could see it, and it was it wasn't successful on the field, and it was enraging the local fans. And I know some people were like, is Jahan Dotson really that good? And it's like, how good does he have to be, and how good do you expect him to be? This is a guy who's again catching passes from Sam Howell, was catching passes with Carson Wentz the year before that, from Heineke, has had some success. That's a hell of a guy to have as your wide receiver 3. If you were saying, oh well, this is the guy that is the missing piece for the Super Bowl for like the Chargers, I'd be like, come on. Yeah. This is a wide receiver 3 who again can take the RPO screen or whatever like that, get yak from it, get open against your nickel guy. That is a heck of an addition.
For sure. And you think about a scheme that's supposedly going to use a lot of pre-snap motion. You can send Dotson in motion. You can, have Barkley, motion from the backfield out into the slot alongside Jahan Dotson. And you still have the 2 perimeter receivers to worry about. It just feels like this is the change of scenery type of situation to get the most out of a player who was picked in the top 15 picks of the draft. So there's real pedigree there. Played a lot of big time football at Penn State. And it just seems like I look at the Eagles and I look at them. We've talked about this. I don't know that anybody in that conference is better than, deeper than, or more complete than the 49ers and the Lions. I put them up on the top of the shelf.
Right.
But you get to that second rung, right, when you get beyond, the Johnny Walker Blues, and you get beyond the, 35-year age Dalmore Scotch on the top shelf, and you're down into like Macallan 15, Johnny Walker Black, Dewars.
What is happening?
You get to that second.
Your kids will be back at school in a couple of days, man. You can start hitting the scotch at 1 o'clock then. We got a couple days left. You don't have to go to like the tier. Where's the Glenlivet? Which team is the Glenlivet?
Yeah, it's probably on the second tier. So the Glenlivet might be the Dallas Cowboys. So
take that back. Take that back now.
You'll be the second tier of teams like the Eagles and the Packers and maybe the Cowboys. If everything breaks their way, the Rams, they're in that second tier. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of optimism that if a couple things go your way, if you're in that second tier, you can go in and you can upset Detroit at Ford Field, or San Francisco may have to come play you because their schedule was tougher, or Green Bay gets hot and they're the team that has to come into Philly because Brock Purdy got hurt. If you're in that second tier, you're in the conversation. This is the long-winded way of saying there's a lot to be optimistic about the Philadelphia Eagles before the Jahan Dotson trade. And I think even more so because of the balance on offense now after that trade.
If the NFC contenders are Scotch, the Falcons are box wine.
Yes.
But I have no idea what that even means. I just figured it was quick. I got there. Obviously, I wrote it the 2 deep zone. It was a little bit more of a pessimistic outlook of things, but we may be looking at the same coin again, where it's like you have these 49ers and Lions teams at the top. And one of the things I keep coming back to with the Eagles is there may be a structural situation that all the Jahan Dotsons and Saquon Barkleys can't necessarily solve, in that this team was probably overvalued last year. That when this team was 10-1, 11-1, beating the Chiefs at the buzzer, beating the Bills at overtime, it was a team playing above its caliber. And the second element of that is, and it's esoteric, I realize that, but you bring in Vic Fangio and you bring in Kellen Moore, and you say, well, those are obvious upgrades over last year's coordinators. May they never be mentioned again. But when you change schemes that significantly, and when you bring in specifically Fangio with his history, where if the first 6, 7, 8 games, you'll get nickel guys out of position, get coverage lapses and all, that can turn into an early season disappointment. And when you start talking about those scenarios, how do you get to the top? losing a couple early season games could put that Eagles in that tier with the Glenfiddich and the Johnny Walker Black. Put them on that tier where you don't necessarily reach the top shelf.
For sure. And it's going to be no picnic going down to Brazil and playing
Mm.
the Packers with Jordan Love and everything they have. They're one of those teams that they might be the most exciting team in the league, in my opinion, long term, this year and long term with the quarterback. All of the receivers are like 12 years old. The quarterback is 14 years old. So they're all going to grow and develop together on cheap contracts other than Jordan Love for a little while here. And they really only have the Lions, and it's a rivalry. Anything can happen there in that division. Atlanta got some love as a surprise team by people inside the league in the survey that ran this week. It's not the easiest of starts for the Eagles, but it's one of those things that if they sweep those two games, now you have a springboard conversation.
You do, but again, and one of the things that when the FTN Almanac, when they do their projections, everything gets thrown into the soup. It's a very precise formula that keeps track of the stuff we lose track of. For example, the Brazil game would have been an Eagles home game.
Yeah, right.
Eagles are short a home game here, so you don't know what kind of advantages or disadvantages either team gets down there. And that's one of those things that's like 0.4 of a win or whatever along the way. When you take those little things, they add up. When you take Jason Kelsey out of the lineup and you say that was a Hall of Fame caliber center, similar to the Rams with Aaron Donald, people are like, I believe in the Rams. Who's replacing Aaron Donald? That's not just because they don't play fantasy football doesn't mean it's not a thing. Those things add up and they kind of stick the Eagles on that tier with the Packers, potentially with the Rams. And no matter how you slice it, including the Vegas odds, 49ers and Lions are on that top shelf.
No, I agree. And in the other side of the ledger in the AFC, you have the Kansas City Chiefs. They're going for a Super Bowl three-peat. It's never been done.
Right.
I look at the roster. It's loaded. Patrick Mahomes. I'm going to go with the dude inside the league who said I'm not betting against Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah.
What's the hurdle? Is it just the weight of history? And you're obviously an NFL history guy yourself. Is it the weight of history? Is it Joe Burrow coming back healthy? Is it Lamar Jackson having another year with Zay Flowers? Is it, a team coming out of nowhere? Is it injuries catching up to them? Or is it just all of the above that could derail this train, in your opinion?
So receiving core full of question marks, a 35-year-old tight end that has to sort of be the Robin to Mahomes' Batman. And it is a brutal AFC. It's really those things. The weight of history is out there, but like, how do you quantify that? How do you know that? Every year is fresh to some degree. But the weight of history impacts the fact that you lose guys in the off season. The weight of history impacts the fact that Kelsey's older and Chris Jones is older. And then when you start looking at those teams that you mentioned, it's a brutal run. When you talk about the 49ers, you say, here are your two rivals and your three quasi-rivals. When you look at the Chiefs, they're like, here are these six other teams that are right about in your wavelength, and you play a lot of them during the season.
For sure. And then once you get to the postseason, you're going to be matched up against, assuming everybody stays healthy, elite quarterbacks, loaded defenses, loaded receiving corps. So it is a much tougher road to hoe. I still think that I don't know how the receiving corps can be as bad or worse than it was a year ago in Kansas City when you're bringing in Hollywood Brown. I'm really bullish on Xavier Worthy. Now maybe he's just a track star who can run track in the Olympics, but can't stay healthy on a football field or can't beat man press coverage, as one coach cautioned me about him a couple weeks ago. Maybe Rashee Rice, maybe he doesn't play it down this year. Anything can happen. But I just look at what they've built. And it seems like if anybody is going to survive that gauntlet, it's the team with Patrick Mahomes and all of those weapons.
Right. And when I wrote for the Almanac, it's like, well, because of Mahomes and because of Reed, because of what these guys have done, the body of work, it almost creates like an eclipse where it's hard to, and it's almost like you give them a win, like you put them one win ahead or two wins ahead based on that. And the other factor about that, we did talk about the Broncos and how they could exceed expectation. We have talked about the Chargers and how there's always this sort of like rumbling that they're going to be special, et cetera. That might be even more than the AFC South, the easiest division to come out of and say, hey, look, we're at 14 wins.
Yeah, absolutely. And, before we get out of here, I want to make it a weekly tradition on the podcast reading the reviews
Oh
from
no.
those who subscribe on Apple Podcasts. And if you are an Apple Podcast person, we appreciate you listening. Please go ahead and jam that follow button. Subscribe to the podcast. It'll get delivered to your feed every week, the moment that they go live. And if you could do us a solid, Mike and I would really appreciate it if you leave us a 5-star rating and write a review, because those 5-star ratings help boost the show up in the algorithm. So people who are looking for NFL podcasts will be higher on the list. It'll help you find us easier. And when that happens, more and better quality guests will be coming to us by proxy to you, the listener. So leave those 5-star ratings, write those 5-star reviews. And we got a review this week to read, Mike.
Yes, yes, and we'll be reading the 5-star reviews.
Yes.
So if you, by the way, and we were saying, if you want your review read, and you want to rip us, okay, if you're part of the Herbert Hive, if you're an Ohio State fan who's tired of the Nittany Lions slurping that comes out of my esteemed colleague over here, if you don't like our Scotch choices, but if you leave a 5-star review, that way you don't actually take money out of our pockets, because that's a little mean.
Yes.
But we'll read your review and you can tear us new body orifices, etc. We will read it. But this one's nice, right? I hope.
This one's funny and very nice. It comes from JP Gamma at Apple Podcasts. 2 veteran journalists unleash their snark and analysis on this great podcast, unquote. So JP, appreciate the review. And, you know, you have been listening. You have been following Mike Tanier on Threads at Mike Tanier. You have been following me on Threads at Matt Lombardo NFL. If you know that we rely on snark and analysis, because in our careers, there are miles and miles of snark behind us and miles of snark still in front of us as we go forward in our careers here. So thank you.
Miles of hard, snarky road. That veteran. I'm starting to feel the age of the veteran, the wizened sage here.
Lots of gray hair coming in here for me as well. It's coming in, growing into that veteran status. We appreciate the review. And as always, please go ahead, a little bit of housekeeping for you, and subscribe to Mike Tanier's Too Deep Zone. It's the kind of analysis and insight and commentary, I promise you, it's not a cliche here. You're not going to get it anywhere else. The blend of humor, snark, in-depth analytics portrayed onto the game. That's all at Mike Tanier's Too Deep Zone at Substack. And if you could subscribe to Between the Hashmarks on Substack as well, that's where you find my in-depth insider reporting, features, columns, the Monday morning column. 4 Downs will be there every Monday. If you could subscribe to both of our Substack newsletters, you'd get the podcast delivered to you immediately as well.
That's right. Remember, Matt does pretty much the podcast. I show up with my hat on and I tell my jokes, etc. So if you really want to stay up to date with what we're doing here, Between the Hashmarks, you go there, you do get the insider information. And again, you'll get this delivered directly to you
the minute it goes live, which should be in a little bit here. Mike, any final thoughts before we roll into week 1 with an asterisk next week, where we make our predictions and all those fun things?
My only last thought is, I'm so glad that the NFL takes Labor Day weekend off. For years they would play, but for them, years after that was cut down day. And you're trying to maybe get a little time with your family in, and your phone starts buzzing with all the cuts, and the cuts are, sad and complicated and tricky, and you have to report about it. A lot of guys are going to get cut in the next couple of days. We feel for them, etc. But then everybody at least gets to take a deep breath. Some of these guys get signed next week, etc. And we all get to take a couple of days off, watch some college football.
Yes.
And a little time with our families a little bit, and then hit the ground running next week.
Hit the ground running, and can't wait. Next week, we will make our predictions for the various awards. We'll make our predictions for the Super Bowl, officially going on the record. We'll have some fun along the way, some big picture thoughts on what to expect for the season ahead. And as always, if you subscribe on Apple Podcasts and you do leave us a 5-star review, let us know what kind of guest, who you'd want to hear from, and we'll go get them and bring them on the podcast. That could be part of the review as well. For Mike Tanier, check him out at Mike Tanier's Too Deep Zone on Substack. Be sure you follow him on Threads at Mike Tanier. I'm at Matt Lombardo NFL on Threads. Hope to talk to you there. Mike, this has been a lot of fun, and we'll talk to everybody next week.
Take care and enjoy your week, folks.